My dad demanded I give my new apartment to my brother, who deserved it unlike me. So, I refused, and when he started threatening to disinherit me, I handed him the documents proving that his favorite son was entirely different from the golden child they all worshipped. The atmosphere in the dining room instantly shifted. My dad stopped yelling. He looked down at the thick manila folder I slid across the polished oak table, his face draining of color. He had expected me to fold. He had expected me to surrender my hard-earned property just like I had surrendered everything else in my life to keep the peace. But this time I wasn't backing down. I knew what was inside that folder, and I knew it was going to destroy the perfect illusion my family had built. Thank you for being here. Please grab a warm cup of water, sit down, and listen as I tell you the whole story. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of evening that was supposed to be about family bonding. The smell of my mom's famous pot roast filled the air, a heavy, savory scent that usually made me feel at home. But today, the air in the dining room felt suffocating. I was sitting across from my parents, Robert and Susan, and my younger brother, Julian. Julian was busy swirling his wine glass, a smug, relaxed smile plastered on his face. My dad pushed his plate away, leaned back in his heavy wooden chair, and looked at me. He didn't ask. He didn't suggest. He announced it. "Mason, your brother is going through a transitional phase," my dad said, his voice carrying the booming authority he used to run his hardware business. "He needs stability. You're going to let Julian move into your new apartment. Furthermore, we're putting the deed into the family trust. It's the smart way to protect the asset. You're doing well, you can afford to rent a smaller place for a while." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the demand left a ringing in my ears. I had just closed on that apartment. I had worked 80-hour weeks for years, saving every single dollar, denying myself vacations and basic luxuries, just to hand over a cashier's check with my own name on it. "No," I said. It was a single, flat syllable. My dad's eyebrows shot up. Julian stopped swirling his wine. My mom let out a small, wounded gasp, immediately pressing a hand to her chest. "Excuse me?" my dad asked, his voice dropping an octave, a clear warning sign. "I bought that apartment," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It's mine. Julian isn't moving in, and it certainly isn't going into any trust." My dad slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled against the china. "You ungrateful son," he snarled. "We are a family. We look out for each other. If you refuse to do this, if you refuse to help your own brother when he needs it most, then you can forget about your inheritance. I will cut you out of the will tomorrow morning. You won't see a single dime of this house or our savings." Julian smirked, a quick, ugly pulling of his lips. He thought he had won. He thought the threat of losing my inheritance would bring me to my knees. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase resting on the floor. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I placed it squarely in the center of the table. "Keep your money, Dad," I said quietly. "But before you start worrying about Julian's stability, you should probably read this." My dad looked from me to the folder. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he reached out and flipped open the cover. To understand what he saw in those papers, you have to understand how we got here. You have to understand the 30 years of history that led to this single, explosive moment. Growing up, there were two distinct realities in our household. There was Julian's world, paved with endless support and second chances. And then there was my world. I learned very early on that love and resources were conditional, and the condition was usually that Julian had to be taken care of first. When I was 16, I wanted to buy a used car to get to school and my part-time job. My dad told me that character was built through hard work, so I got a job flipping burgers at a local diner. I smelled like stale grease and onions every single day. I worked late shifts hoarding my paychecks. When Julian turned 16 2 years later, a brand new SUV miraculously appeared in the driveway with a giant red bow on it. I remember asking my mom about it. I wasn't even angry, just genuinely confused. "I thought we couldn't afford cars for teenagers," I had said, standing in the kitchen in my grease-stained uniform. My mom gave me that look. It was a look of tired patience, the one she used to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. Mason, you have always been so strong and independent, she sighed, stirring a pot on the stove. Julian is different. He's sensitive. He needs a little extra encouragement. Besides, your dad had some extra money from a good quarter at the shop. The breaking point for my understanding of our family dynamics happened when I was 18. I had been accepted into a good state university. I asked my dad about the college fund they had always talked about when we were kids. He sat me down in his office, adjusting his glasses. Mason, the economy has been tough. We had to dip into that fund for some emergency repairs on the house, and to cover some of Julian's private tutoring. But you're a smart kid. You have a good salary from the diner. You can take out student loans. It'll teach you financial responsibility. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I nodded. I didn't argue. I worked 2 jobs throughout my entire 4 years of college. I worked overnight security and weekend retail. I was permanently exhausted, living off cheap ramen and coffee, while Julian went to a ridiculously expensive private arts college out of state, fully funded by my parents. Every time I called home, my mom would go on and on about Julian's brilliance. He's finding himself, Mason. He's networking. Networking, apparently, meant partying on my parents' dime. I was building character, he was building a lifestyle. I realized then that my role in the family was to be the reliable background character. I was the safety net. Whenever Julian stumbled, I was expected to step aside, make myself smaller, and let my parents pour all their energy and money into catching him. I stopped asking for help. I stopped expecting fairness. I decided that if I was ever going to have anything in this life, I would have to build it entirely with my own 2 hands. I buried my resentment under a mountain of ambition. I told myself that my independence was my armor. If I didn't need them, they couldn't hurt me. But the truth was, it still hurt. It hurt to watch your own parents look right past you, to realize that no matter how hard you worked, you would never be the favorite. The real fracture, the moment the invisible line in the sand was drawn permanently, happened the year I graduated college. I had managed to land a decent entry-level job at an architectural design firm. I was still drowning in student loan debt, but I was proud. I was surviving. That same summer, Julian managed to barely scrape by and graduate from his arts program. To celebrate, my dad did the unthinkable. He bought Julian a Porsche. Not a new one, but a sleek, fast, incredibly expensive used sports car. I remember standing in the driveway, looking at the gleaming metal, feeling a sickening knot in my stomach. He needs to project an image of success, my dad told me, clapping Julian on the shoulder. In his industry, it's all about how you present yourself. 3 weeks later, the phone rang at 2 a.m. It was a torrential downpour outside. I answered it groggily. It was my mom, hysterical. I rushed over to their house. Julian was sitting on the living room sofa, pale, shaking, and smelling strongly of expensive tequila. He was uninjured, but he looked terrified. My dad was pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair. "What happened?" I asked. "He crashed the car," my dad said grimly. "Wrapped the front end around a concrete barrier off the interstate. He fled the scene before the cops arrived." I stared at Julian. "You hit and run? Were you drinking?" Julian put his head in his hands and started sobbing. My mom immediately rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him, glaring at me. "Don't interrogate him, Mason. He's traumatized." My dad stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were dark, calculating. "Mason, your brother's career is just starting. If he gets a DUI, if he gets charged with fleeing the scene, his life is over. The insurance will drop us. The legal fees will bankrupt him. He should have thought about that before he got behind the wheel," I said coldly. My dad stepped closer to me. "I need you to do something for the family, Mason. Your record is completely clean. You don't drink. If you say you were driving, if you say the roads were slick and you panicked." The room went dead silent. Only the sound of the rain lashing against the windows filled the space. I looked at my dad, unable to comprehend the words coming out of his mouth. He wanted me to take a criminal charge. He wanted me to risk my new job, my pristine record, my entire future, to save Julian from the consequences of his own reckless stupidity. "You want me to take the fall," I whispered. "You're strong, Mason." My mom pleaded from the sofa, her face streaked with tears. "You can handle this. You always handle everything. Julian is too fragile for jail or a trial." My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. A thick blue vein throbbed at my temple. The sheer, breathtaking unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. They weren't asking for a favor. They were asking for a sacrifice. My life for his. "No," I said. "Mason, please." My dad started, raising his voice. "I said no," I yelled, the anger finally bursting out of my chest. "I am not ruining my life because he can't handle his liquor. Call a lawyer. Deal with it." I turned around and walked out the front door into the pouring rain. I didn't look back. That night, I realized my parents didn't see me as a son. They saw me as Julian's shield. After that night, I went low contact with my family. I heard through the grapevine, mostly from my Aunt Helen, who always dressed in dark colors and looked like she was permanently headed to a funeral, that my dad had hired a very expensive defense attorney. They managed to keep Julian out of jail, pleading it down to reckless driving. But the legal fees and the cost of replacing the destroyed city property took a massive toll on my parents' savings. Naturally, no one ever spoke of it again. It was swept under the rug, just another mess cleaned up for the golden child. I channeled all my anger and betrayal into my work. I partnered up with a guy named Carter, a brilliant structural engineer I met at my firm. We were both tired of working for other people, so we took a massive risk. We quit our stable jobs, pooled our meager savings, and started our own commercial design agency. For 3 years, I barely slept. We operated out of a tiny, windowless office that smelled like old coffee and printer toner. I worked 18-hour days. I slept on an air mattress under my desk more times than I could count. I poured every ounce of my soul into building that company. I wanted to create something that nobody could ever take away from me. Our big break came when we pitched a design for a boutique hotel to a developer named Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling was an older gentleman, sharp as a tack, who had built his real estate empire from nothing. On the day of the pitch, I saw him pull up to our building in a pristine vintage Porsche 911. It wasn't flashy or obnoxious. It was classic, impeccably maintained, the kind of car you buy because you appreciate the engineering, not because you want to show off. We nailed the pitch. After we signed the contract, Mr. Sterling took Carter and me out for lunch. He asked about my background. I gave him the sanitized version, but he was perceptive. "You have the hungry look, Mason," Mr. Sterling told me, swirling his iced tea. "The look of a man who knows that no one is coming to save him. Hold on to that. People who are handed things never learn how to grip them tightly. The reward is in the climb, not the view." His words resonated deep within my bones. He became a mentor to me. Under his guidance, our business exploded. We landed bigger contracts. I gave myself a substantial promotion and a massive salary increase. I watched my bank account grow from double digits to 6 figures, and eventually 7. I had done it. I had clawed my way out of the shadow of my family's expectations. I didn't know my dad a dime. I didn't owe my mom an apology. I was a self-made man. But success has a funny way of acting like a beacon. It shines brightly, and it attracts people who prefer to live in the dark. I thought I had escaped my family's gravity. I thought my financial independence made me untouchable. I was wrong. My success didn't make them respect me. It just made them realize I was a resource they hadn't fully exploited yet. By the time I was 32, I was ready to plant roots. I found a stunning penthouse apartment in a rapidly developing downtown district. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, and a view of the city skyline that made all those sleepless nights on the air mattress worth it. I paid for it in cash. No mortgage, no debt. It was mine, free and clear. I was so incredibly proud that, against my better judgment, I decided to host a small housewarming party and invite my family. I wanted them to see it. Maybe, deep down, the little boy inside me still wanted his dad to pat him on the back and say, "I'm proud of you, son." That was my first mistake. They arrived late, of course. Julian walked in wearing a tailored designer suit that probably cost more than my first car. He had this way of walking into a room like he owned the building, a false bravado built on our parents' credit cards. My mom immediately started fussing over the catering, complaining that the crab puffs were too cold. My dad walked around tapping the walls, inspecting the crown molding like a building inspector looking for a bribe. Julian stood by the island in my custom kitchen, sipping a glass of my expensive bourbon. He looked around, his eyes sweeping over the high-end appliances and the custom lighting fixtures. There was a tight, unpleasant tightness around his mouth. "It's nice, Mason," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A little sterile, maybe, a little cold, but I guess it suits a bachelor. You know, in my line of work, we prefer spaces with more organic energy." Julian claimed to be an entrepreneur, which, as far as I could tell, meant he jumped from one vague, buzzword-heavy startup idea to another, always needing seed money from our parents. "I like it just fine," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Later that evening, I went out to the balcony to get some air. The sliding glass door was cracked open. I heard voices drifting from the living room. It was my mom and Aunt Helen. "It's just a bit much, don't you think?" Aunt Helen whispered loudly. "Buying a place like this for just one person. It's almost selfish, especially when you think about Robert and Susan still living in that drafty old house." "I know, Helen," my mom sighed, playing her favorite role of the long-suffering martyr. "And poor Julian is under so much pressure right now with his new venture. He's living in that tiny rental across town. It breaks my heart to see him struggle while Mason has all this empty space. He doesn't even use the guest room." I stood frozen on the balcony, the cold night air biting at my face. The sheer entitlement made me nauseous. I had bought this place with money I earned from bleeding over blueprints and dealing with difficult contractors, while Julian hadn't worked an honest 40-hour week in his life. Yet, in their twisted narrative, my success was somehow a direct insult to Julian's struggle, and my wealth was a family asset that I was selfishly hoarding. I didn't confront them that night. I let them drink my wine and eat my food, and I smiled a tight, polite smile until they finally left. But as I locked the door behind them, a cold realization settled over me. The war wasn't over. They had seen what I had, and they wanted it. The campaign started a week after the housewarming party. It didn't begin with a direct attack. My family was much more insidious than that. It started with my mom's phone calls. I was at my desk, reviewing structural blueprints for a new commercial complex, when my phone buzzed. I saw my mom's name on the screen. I sighed, rubbed my temples, and answered. "Hi, Mom." "Mason," she said, her voice wavering, thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry to bother you at work. I know you're so busy and important now." The passive-aggressive jab landed right on cue. "What's wrong, Mom?" "It's your brother," she sobbed softly. "He's in a very dark place, Mason. His investors pulled out of his new tech startup. He's under so much pressure he's barely sleeping. I went to visit him at his rental yesterday, and the place is a disaster. There's mold in the bathroom. The neighbors are so noisy. It's no environment for a visionary to think." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Mom, Julian is 30 years old. If he doesn't like his apartment, he needs to find a job and move." "How can you be so cold?" she snapped, the tears vanishing instantly, replaced by sharp indignation. "He's family. You have that massive penthouse. You have a beautiful guest room that just sits there gathering dust. Why can't he just stay with you for a few months, just until he gets back on his feet? It would mean the world to him and to us." There it was, the hook. "No, Mom," I said firmly. "I love my space. I work from home sometimes. I need quiet. Julian and I don't live well together. He can't stay here. You wouldn't even notice he's there," she pleaded, ramping the emotion back up. Mason, please. I'm worried about his mental health. If you just let him stay, he could use your address for his business mail. It looks so much more professional. You have to help him. If you don't, I don't know what will happen to him." She was laying the guilt on with a trowel, trying to trigger that ingrained childhood response where I would jump to fix whatever was broken. But I wasn't 18 anymore. "My answer is no, Mom. Do not ask me again." I hung up the phone. I stared at the black screen of my phone, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. I felt the familiar, toxic guilt trying to creep into my chest, but I pushed it down. I was establishing a boundary. It was the hardest thing I had ever done with my family. For the next 2 weeks, the calls kept coming. Sometimes she was angry, accusing me of abandoning my blood. Sometimes she played the victim, talking about how her chest pained her from all the stress and how my stubbornness was going to put her in an early grave. I stopped answering. I let them go to voicemail, listening to them later with Carter sitting across from me, shaking his head in disbelief. "They're treating you like a bank vault man," Carter said one evening, tossing a pen onto his desk. "And they're just looking for the right combination to crack you open." He was right. But what I didn't know was that while my mom was trying the emotional approach, Julian was already taking matters into his own hands. It happened on a Thursday evening. I had just finished a grueling negotiation with a steel supplier and was walking into the lobby of my building. My building is secure, requiring a key fob for the elevators and the front doors, and we have a strict concierge desk. As I walked through the revolving glass doors, I heard loud, obnoxious laughter echoing across the marble floors. I looked over toward the plush lounge area near the elevators. There was Julian. He was sitting on a velvet sofa, legs crossed, holding a cup of artisan coffee. He was surrounded by 3 other guys dressed in similar tech bro uniforms, expensive sneakers and custom blazers. Julian was gesturing expansively, talking loudly enough for the whole lobby to hear. "And the amenities here are fantastic," Julian was saying. "I'm having the interior designer come back next week to look at the guest wing. It's perfect for hosting client dinners." I froze. My blood turned to ice water, and then immediately boiled over. He was talking about my apartment. He was acting like he owned the place. I walked over. The concierge, Elena, caught my eye. She looked incredibly uncomfortable. She gave me a slight, apologetic nod. Julian must have tailgated someone through the front door. "Julian," I said, my voice sharp and loud enough to cut through his monologue. Julian looked up. For a fraction of a second, panic flashed in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with his signature arrogant smirk. He stood up, opening his arms. "Mason, little brother," he practically shouted. He turned to his friends. "Guys, this is Mason. He helped me facilitate the purchase of the penthouse." I stared at him. The sheer, pathological delusion of his words left me temporarily speechless. He wasn't just lying to them. He was trying to force me to play along with the lie in public. "What are you doing here, Julian?" I asked, ignoring his outstretched hand. "Just giving my potential partners a tour of the building before we head upstairs," he said smoothly, leaning in close. His breath smelled like peppermint and deceit. "Play along, Maze. I need these guys to invest. Let us up for an hour. I'll make it worth your while." I looked at his friends. They were watching us with polite confusion. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just spoke with absolute cold authority. "I don't know what my brother told you, gentlemen, but he doesn't live here. He doesn't own property here. And he is certainly not taking anyone upstairs to my home." The silence in the lobby was deafening. The 3 men looked at Julian, their expressions shifting from respect to suspicion. Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "Mason, don't be an idiot. We're doing business." "You're trespassing," I corrected him. I turned to Elena at the front desk. "Elena, my brother is not on my guest list. He will never be on my guest list. If he shows up here again, please call building security to escort him out." "Understood, Mr. Mason," Elena said quickly. Julian's jaw dropped. The humiliation was absolute. His friends muttered awkward excuses and practically ran for the revolving doors, leaving Julian standing alone in the middle of the lobby. He glared at me, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're going to regret that, you selfish prick. You just ruined $1 million deal for me." "Get out of my building, Julian," I said, turning my back on him and pressing the elevator button. I felt his eyes burning holes in the back of my head until the elevator doors closed. The war had escalated. It was no longer cold. It was out in the open. The incident in the lobby left me on edge. Julian was getting desperate. When my brother got desperate, he got dangerous. I needed to know what was really going on with him. I knew my parents would only feed me the fantasy version where Julian was a misunderstood genius. I needed reality. A few days later, fate intervened. I was grabbing lunch at a deli near the courthouse. I had been reviewing some zoning permits. As I waited for my sandwich, I heard a hesitant voice. "Mason." I turned around. Standing there was Sarah. Sarah was Julian's ex-fiancée. They had dated for 3 years, and my parents had adored her. Then, about 8 months ago, the engagement was abruptly called off. My mom claimed Sarah couldn't handle Julian's intense entrepreneurial spirit. I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted. The bright, bubbly woman I remembered had dark circles under her eyes and looked like she had aged 10 years. She looked like a mother who had just lost a bitter custody battle, utterly drained of life. "Sarah." "Hi. It's been a while," I said gently. We sat down at a small corner table. She gripped her paper coffee cup like it was a lifeline. "I heard you bought a place downtown," she said quietly. "Congratulations. You always worked so hard." "Thanks. How are you doing?" I asked. She let out a hollow laugh. "I'm surviving. Barely." She looked around nervously, then leaned in. "Mason, stay away from Julian. Keep your finances locked down tight." I frowned, the hair on my arms standing up. "What do you mean? What happened between you two?" Tears welled up in her eyes. She wiped them away aggressively. "I'm so glad we didn't get married. A divorce would have ruined me entirely. As it is, it's going to take me a decade to recover." "Recover from what?" "Julian didn't have any investors," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "His business was a complete sham. He convinced me to co-sign on business loans. He took out credit cards in my name, claiming his credit was tied up in corporate assets. He maxed out everything. Tens of thousands of dollars, Mason. He spent it on designer clothes, leased cars, expensive dinners to look the part of a CEO. When the bills came due, he bailed. He left me with all of it." I sat back in my chair, stunned. I knew Julian was spoiled. I knew he was lazy, but I didn't know he was a predator. "Did you go to the police?" I asked. "My lawyer said it's a civil matter because I willingly gave him access, even though he lied about the intent," she said bitterly. "I'm suing him, but he's hiding. He changes his address. He works entirely off the books or through shell accounts. He's a ghost when it comes to debt collectors." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "He's desperate, Mason. He burned me. He burned his last landlord. He's running out of people to leech off of, and you're the richest person he knows. Don't let him in." I thanked Sarah, paid for her lunch, and walked back to my office in a daze. The pieces of the puzzle were violently snapping together. The frantic phone calls from my mom. The attempt to show off my apartment. Julian wasn't looking for a place to think. He was looking for a new host to drain. When I got back to the office, my assistant, Chloe, was pacing in front of my desk. Chloe was brilliant, a former paralegal who kept my entire life organized. She looked deeply concerned. "Mason, we have a problem," she said, shutting my office door behind me. "What is it?" "I was reviewing the corporate accounts and your personal banking portals this morning. Just routine checks," Chloe said, pulling up a tablet. "I noticed a flag on your personal mortgage application profile at First National." I frowned. "I don't have a mortgage. I paid cash for the penthouse." "I know," Chloe said grimly, "but someone initiated an inquiry for a home equity line of credit against the property. A massive one. $500,000. My stomach dropped. Who? The bank flagged it for suspicious activity because the security questions failed. I called the fraud department. They pulled the recording of the phone call. Chloe tapped the screen and slid it across the desk. Listen. I pressed play. The audio was slightly fuzzy, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Julian. Yes, hi, this is Julian, calling on behalf of my brother, Mason. We're looking into extracting some equity from the downtown property for a joint family venture. I have his social security number right here, and I am listed as a secondary contact on his emergency family file. The recording ended. I sat in my chair, staring at the blank wall opposite my desk. The silence in the room was heavy. He tried to impersonate me, I said, my voice eerily calm. He tried to take out a $500,000 loan against my home. He didn't have your secure PIN, so they locked the account, Chloe explained softly. But Mason, he had your social. He had enough basic information to get past the first tier of security. If he had known the answer to your mother's maiden name, which, ironically, he got wrong because he misspelled it, he might have gotten further. I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity. The absolute lack of morality. Sarah's words echoed in my head. He's running out of people to leech off of. Julian wasn't just an annoying brother anymore. He was an active threat to my livelihood. He was trying to steal the foundation I had built with my own sweat and blood. And worse, I knew exactly who gave him my social security number and financial details. My dad kept meticulous records of everything in his home safe, including files on me from before I moved out. Chloe, I said, opening my eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Yes, boss. Call Carter. Tell him to get in here. And then, I need you to find the best private investigator and financial forensic lawyer in the city. Tell them money is no object. I want to know everything. I want every debt, every lawsuit, every shell company Julian is tied to. What are we doing? Chloe asked, her eyes widening. My family wants to play a game of leverage, I said, sliding the tablet back to her. They think I'm still the quiet kid who will take the fall to protect their golden child. It's time to show them exactly who they're dealing with. I'm going to build a bomb, and I'm going to drop it right in the middle of their dining room table. The next 2 weeks felt like living in a spy thriller. While my mom continued to leave me tearful, manipulative voicemails, and my dad sent me terse texts demanding I come over for a serious family discussion. I was assembling a war room. Carter, Chloe, and a high-powered attorney named Marcus sat in our conference room, the walls lined with white bards. Marcus was a bulldog of a lawyer, a guy who specialized in unraveling corporate fraud and hidden assets. Your brother is a walking disaster zone, Marcus said one Tuesday afternoon, dropping a thick stack of printed reports onto the glass table. It actually takes a specific kind of talent to ruin your credit this spectacularly by the age of 30. I leaned forward, looking at the top sheet. It was a credit report. The numbers were staggering. Walk me through it, I said. Marcus picked up a red marker. First, the consumer debt. He has maxed out 14 different credit cards. Half of them are in his name. The other half are joint accounts with his ex-fiancée, Sarah, which he subsequently drained and abandoned. That's roughly $80,000 in high-interest debt right there. Carter let out a low whistle. Jesus. It gets worse, Marcus continued. He's been evicted from his last 2 luxury apartments. He writes bad checks for the deposit, moves in, lives there for 6 months while fighting the eviction notices in court using delay tactics, and then skips town before the sheriffs show up. He currently owes his last landlord, a Mr. Vance, over $40,000 in back rent and damages. So he has no money, no credit, and active judgments against him, I said, synthesizing the data. That explains why he's so desperate to get his hands on my apartment. He needs a physical asset to borrow against because no bank will touch him. Exactly, Marcus said. If you had signed the deed over to him, or put it into a trust that he had access to, he would have immediately leveraged it to the hilt. The bank would have foreclosed on your apartment within a year when he inevitably defaulted on the loan. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My dad had demanded I put the apartment into a family trust. Did my dad know? Was my dad actively trying to help Julian steal my home to cover these debts? The thought made me physically ill. But here is the truly fascinating part, Marcus said, his eyes gleaming. He pulled out a separate, smaller file. It was sealed with a red tab. Julian is sloppy, but he's not stupid. He knew civil judgments would only garnish his wages, and since he has no reported income, he's basically judgment-proof. But he crossed a line recently. A big one. Marcus slid the file toward me. I dug into the state's public records. Julian isn't just facing angry landlords and ex-girlfriends. He has caught the attention of the state attorney general's office. I opened the file. It was a preliminary notice of a civil fraud investigation. He set up a fake investment fund, Marcus explained quietly. He took money from a handful of private, unsophisticated investors, mostly elderly people he met at country clubs he sneaked into. He promised them guaranteed returns on a real estate venture that didn't exist. It's a textbook Ponzi scheme, Mason, and it's unraveling. I stared at the state seal on the investigation documents. Fraud, I whispered. He's going to prison. Maybe, Marcus said cautiously. Right now it's a civil probe. They are looking to recover the stolen funds for the victims. If Julian can pay back the principal, they might drop the criminal charges to avoid a lengthy trial. But the sum is massive. He owes these investors close to $400,000. He doesn't have $400,000, Carter pointed out. He doesn't have 400 cents. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, Marcus said. His tone changed. It lost the clinical, lawyerly edge and became surprisingly sympathetic. He looked at me, his expression grave. Mason, I need you to brace yourself for this. This is going to hurt. He handed me a single piece of paper. It looked like a standard property deed, but it was stamped with a recent date and the logo of a high-risk lending firm. I scanned the document. It was a mortgage agreement, a second mortgage. I looked at the property address. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't my apartment. It was a house in the suburbs. It was the house I grew up in. My parents' house. Julian took out a second mortgage on my parents' house? I asked, my voice cracking slightly despite my best efforts to remain stoic. He didn't just take it out, Marcus corrected gently. Look at the signatures. I looked down. There, at the bottom of the page, was my dad's signature. Robert's bold, looping handwriting. And next to it, my mom's shaky cursive. They co-signed, Carter realized, his eyes wide with horror. They mortgaged their own retirement home to give him the money. Yes, Marcus confirmed. About 6 months ago. Right around the time the state investigation started making noise. Your parents took out a high-interest loan against the equity of their fully paid-off home. They handed the cash to Julian to try and quietly pay off the defrauded investors before the state filed criminal charges. But Julian being Julian, he didn't pay them off? I finished the sentence, feeling a cold, dark void opening up in my chest. No, he paid off a fraction of it to keep them quiet, and likely spent the rest trying to maintain his lifestyle and fighting the other lawsuits. The state probe is still active. And worse, Marcus tapped the mortgage document. This loan is predatory. The interest rate is insane. I checked the payment history. They are 3 months behind on payments. The bank is going to initiate foreclosure proceedings on your parents' house within the next 30 days. I sat in the chair, the air completely knocked out of my lungs. It all made sense now. The aggressive demands, the frantic phone calls, the insistence on the family trust. My dad wasn't just trying to get Julian a nice place to live. My dad was trying to steal my apartment to replace the house he was about to lose. He had bankrupted himself trying to save his golden boy from prison, and now he was coming for my assets to save himself. They were going to sacrifice me again. They were going to throw me into the fire to keep Julian warm. Print it all out, I said to Chloe, my voice turning to stone. Put it in a folder. Thick one. I have a family dinner to attend this Sunday. The drive to my parents' house that Sunday evening felt like a march to the executioner's block. The heavy manila folder sat on the passenger seat of my car, thick with the weight of my brother's crimes and my parents' desperate lies. I pulled into the driveway, parking right behind Julian's leased Mercedes. He hadn't made a car payment in 4 months, according to Marcus, but he still made sure to park it front and center. I walked through the front door and was hit immediately by the smell of pot roast. When my dad pushed his plate away and folded his hands on the table, I knew it was time. "We need to talk about the future of this family," my dad started, his voice adopting that booming, authoritative tone he always used when he wanted to shut down an argument before it even began. "Julian has had a string of bad luck. The economy is hostile to young entrepreneurs. But family protects family. That is the rule of this house." Julian nodded solemnly, looking down at his wine glass like a misunderstood martyr. "Your brother needs a stable environment to restructure his business," my dad continued, looking directly at me. "I've spoken to a lawyer. We are going to establish a family trust. You are going to transfer the deed of your new downtown apartment into this trust. Julian will live there, rent-free until his company takes off. In return, the trust will protect the asset." The sheer arrogance of the demand hung in the air. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was dictating the terms of my surrender. "You want me to sign my home over to a trust that you control, so Julian can live in it," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's the smart move," my dad insisted, his jaw tightening. "You have plenty of money. You can afford a nice rental somewhere else for a year or 2. Stop being so selfish, Mason. Look at your brother. He is struggling." My mom chimed in, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Mason, please. I can't sleep at night worrying about him. You have so much space. Why are you hoarding it when your own flesh and blood is suffering?" I looked at Julian. He was watching me with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. He genuinely believed I was going to fold. He believed that the pressure of my parents' disappointment would crush me, just like it always had. "No," I said. The word dropped onto the table like a lead weight. My dad's face darkened instantly. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated louder this time. "I bought that apartment with my own money. My name is on the deed. Julian is never stepping foot inside it, and I am certainly not signing it over to your trust." My dad slammed his palm flat against the oak table. The wine glasses rattled. "You arrogant, ungrateful brat. We gave you everything. We raised you. We paid for your life under this roof." "You paid for Julian's life," I corrected him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice remaining steady. "I paid for my own. If you refuse to do this," my dad roared, his face turning a mottled purple, "if you turn your back on your brother when he needs you most, then you are no longer a part of this family. I will call my lawyer tomorrow morning. I will write you out of the will entirely. You will be disinherited. You won't see a single dime of this house, the savings, or the estate. Do you understand me?" He played his trump card, the great, looming threat of the inheritance. I reached down to my briefcase resting on the floor. "Keep your money, Dad," I said. I pulled the thick manila folder out of my bag and tossed it onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud right next to the gravy boat. "Before you call your lawyer to cut me out of the will," I said, leaning back in my chair, "you might want to read that." My dad stared at the folder. He looked at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, then slowly reached out and flipped open the cover. Julian leaned over to look. "What is this? Are you trying to threaten us with some fake legal garbage?" "Mason, page 1 is Julian's credit report," I said calmly, ignoring Julian and speaking directly to my dad. 14 maxed-out credit cards. $80,000 in high-interest consumer debt. Page 3 is a list of eviction notices from 3 different luxury complexes, including a current judgment from a Mr. Vance for $40,000 in back rent and damages. My dad's eyes darted rapidly across the pages. His breathing shallowed. "That's a lie," Julian stammered, the smirk finally sliding off his face. "Those are business expenses. It's corporate debt, not personal. He hacked my accounts. Dad, this is illegal. Flip to page 8, I instructed, my voice cutting through Julian's panic like a blade. My dad turned the pages with trembling fingers. He stopped at the document bearing the state seal. "That is a preliminary notice of a civil fraud investigation from the state attorney general," I explained. "Julian took almost $400,000 from elderly investors for a fake real estate fund. It's a Ponzi scheme. He is currently under investigation for felony fraud." My mom let out a sharp, breathless gasp and pressed both hands over her mouth. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with terror. "Julian? What is he talking about? Tell me he's lying." Julian was pale, sweating. "Mom, it's a misunderstanding with the accounting. My partners messed up the books. I'm fixing it." "You don't have partners," I said coldly. "And you aren't fixing anything. You're running. You wanted my apartment because you have absolutely no credit left, and no landlord in this state will rent to you. If I had put that deed into a trust, you would have used the property as collateral to take out a massive loan to pay off your victims, and then you would have defaulted. The bank would have seized my home." My dad just stared at the state investigation papers. He looked like a man who had just been told he had a terminal illness. The absolute, unshakable faith he had in his golden child was shattering right in front of my eyes. "But I know you already knew about the fraud, Dad," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the table. My dad snapped his head up, his eyes meeting mine. There was genuine fear in his expression now. "Turn to the last page," I commanded. He didn't want to. His hand shook so violently he could barely grip the paper. But he turned it. "That," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "is a high-interest second mortgage agreement, taken out 6 months ago, against this very house." My mom started to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. "You co-signed a predatory loan," I said to my dad. "To borrow against your own retirement home, to give Julian the cash to pay back the people he stole from. You tried to buy his way out of prison. But Julian didn't pay them back, did he? He spent it. And now, you are 3 months behind on the mortgage payments." Silence fell over the dining room. A crushing, absolute silence, broken only by my mom's weeping. "You threatened to disinherit me," I said, letting a bitter laugh escape my throat. "You threatened to cut me out of an estate that doesn't exist anymore. Julian already spent my inheritance. And next month, when the bank starts foreclosure proceedings, you are going to lose this house." The transformation of my father was terrifying to watch. The proud, aggressive patriarch who had yelled at me 5 minutes ago was gone. In his place sat a broken, hollowed-out old man. He slumped down into his heavy wooden chair, his shoulders caving in. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't even look at Julian. He just stared blankly at the mortgage document bearing his own signature. Julian, however, was shifting into survival mode. He jumped up from his chair, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You set me up," Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "You hired someone to dig into my life. You're trying to destroy this family because you've always been jealous of me. Dad, tell him to get out. Tell him." My dad didn't move. He didn't speak. "Mom," Julian pleaded, turning to her. "He's making this up. The loans, the house, it's a temporary cash flow problem. I'm going to close a massive deal next week and pay everything off." My mom looked at Julian. For the first time in 30 years, the veil of delusion was lifted from her eyes. She saw him not as her sensitive, misunderstood genius, but as the predator he truly was. She saw the man who had stolen her security, her home, and her future. "You promised us?" my mom whispered, her voice raw and broken. "You promised you would pay those people back and the police would go away. You promised." "I did. I am," Julian yelled frantically. "You haven't made a mortgage payment in 3 months." My dad finally spoke. His voice was a dry, raspy croak. It sounded like it was coming from a corpse. The bank called me on Friday, Julian. They sent the final warning. Julian froze. He backed away from the table, his eyes darting toward the front door. The cornered rat was looking for an exit. I have to go make some calls, Julian stammered, grabbing his keys from the sideboard. I'll fix this. I'll get the money. I swear. He didn't even look back. He bolted out the front door, the heavy wood slamming shut behind him. A moment later, the engine of the leased Mercedes roared to life, and tires screeched as he sped out of the driveway. He was running away, just like he ran away from the crashed Porsche, just like he ran away from Sarah, just like he ran away from every single consequence in his entire life. Only this time he had left my parents holding the bag. I sat at the table, looking at the two people who had raised me. They looked incredibly small. For my entire life they had held all the power. They controlled the narrative. They decided who was good and who was bad, who was deserving and who was selfish. But the power in a family doesn't actually come from money or authority. It comes from the willingness of everyone else to play along with the lie. I had just shattered the lie. The power was gone. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I slowly stood up from the dining table. I buttoned my suit jacket, feeling a strange, profound sense of calm wash over me. The anger that had burned in my chest for the past decade was completely gone, replaced by a cold, surgical detachment. You didn't want my apartment to give Julian stability, I said, looking down at my father. You wanted it because you knew the bank was going to take this house, and you needed a place to live. You were willing to let Julian destroy my credit, my home, and my future, just to cover up your own massive mistake. My dad finally looked up at me. His eyes were filled with tears, a sight I had never seen before. Mason, son, please, don't call me that, I said sharply. You lost the right to call me your son the night you asked me to take the fall for a drunk driving charge. You lost it when you drained my college fund to pay for his toys. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose Julian. We're going to lose the house, my mom wailed, burying her face in her hands. Where are we going to go, Mason? What are we going to do? You should probably call a bankruptcy lawyer, I said flatly, and I suggest you do it first thing tomorrow morning. I reached across the table, picked up my briefcase, and turned toward the door. Mason, wait! My dad called out, his voice cracking with desperation. He actually tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to give out and he slumped back heavily into the chair. You can't just walk out. We are your family. You have to help us. I stopped in the doorway and looked back at them one last time. They weren't monsters. They were just flawed, terrified people who had loved one child so blindly that they had destroyed themselves in the process. I didn't hate them anymore. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity. I am helping you, I said softly. I'm giving you exactly what you gave me my entire life. I'm letting you handle the consequences of your own actions. I walked out of the house. I stepped off the front porch and into the cool Sunday night air. The streetlights cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the neighborhood I grew up in. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp autumn air. Felt incredibly clean. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the house, knowing with absolute certainty that I would never set foot inside it again. The fallout started exactly 48 hours later. When a toxic family system is threatened, the enablers come crawling out of the woodwork to try and force the rogue element back into line. My phone rang while I was sitting in my office reviewing CAD files. The caller ID flashed Aunt Helen's name. I let it ring 3 times before I hit the green button. I wanted to hear exactly what the narrative was going to be. Mason, Aunt Helen shrieked into the receiver. What on earth did you do to your parents? Susan called me having a literal panic attack. She said you threatened them and walked out. I didn't threaten anyone, Helen, I said evenly. I showed them Julian's financial records and the second mortgage they took out. There was a brief pause. She clearly didn't know I knew about the house, but she recovered quickly, shifting seamlessly into her role as the manipulator. Well, families have financial troubles, Mason, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. That doesn't mean you abandon them. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. You are an incredibly successful young man. You have a massive salary. It is your duty as a son to step up. You need to hire them a lawyer and pay off that bank loan immediately. No, I said. Excuse me? I said no, Helen. I'm not paying off Julian's fraud debts, and I'm not bailing out the mortgage. They made this mess. They can clean it up. You selfish, arrogant little boy, she spat, her voice turning venomous. After everything they did for you, if you don't help them, I will make sure everyone in this family knows exactly what kind of monster you are. Do whatever you want, Helen, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. But understand this. If you ever call my phone again to ask me for money or to advocate for Julian, I will block your number. If you show up at my apartment or my office, I will have you arrested for trespassing. This is the last conversation we will ever have. I hung up. I immediately blocked her number. 10 minutes later, my cousin Wyatt texted me. Hey man, heard things got crazy. You should probably just chip in a little to help Uncle Robert. He's old. Don't be a jerk. I remembered Wyatt. Wyatt, who had snooped around my housewarming party and reported back to my dad about the value of my property. Wyatt, the little spy. I didn't even reply. I blocked his number, too. Over the next week, I blocked 4 more extended family members. I instituted a strict security protocol at my office building, giving the front desk photos of my parents and Julian, with strict instructions to call the police if they showed up. I locked down my credit, moved my business accounts to a new, highly secure banking institution, and changed all my passwords. I built an iron fortress around my life. It was painful at first. Cutting off your own blood feels like amputating a limb without anesthesia. But as the days turned into weeks, the phantom pain faded. I realized I wasn't losing a family. I was shedding a parasite. For the first time in 32 years, my energy, my money, and my peace of mind belonged entirely to me. 6 months passed. A lot can change in half a year when you aren't carrying the dead weight of other people's bad decisions. Carter and I landed a massive contract to design a new corporate headquarters for a tech firm downtown. It was the biggest project of our careers. We moved out of our cramped, windowless office and into a beautiful, spacious studio overlooking the river. The business was thriving, and the stress that used to keep me awake at night was replaced by a deep, satisfying exhaustion that only comes from honest, hard work. One Friday evening in late spring, I hosted a small celebration at my penthouse. It wasn't like the tense, miserable housewarming party with my family. The air was filled with genuine laughter. Carter was there with his wife. Chloe, my assistant, was chatting with our lead contractors. Mr. Sterling, my mentor, arrived holding a bottle of vintage champagne. He walked in, looking sharp in a tailored navy suit, and handed me the bottle. To the victors, Mr. Sterling said, raising a glass. You built a hell of a firm, Mason. I always knew you had the grit for it. Thanks to your guidance, sir. I smiled, clinking my glass against his. He took a sip and looked around the room, his keen eyes observing the relaxed, happy atmosphere. I notice a distinct lack of family drama tonight. You look lighter, Mason, like you finally dropped a heavy backpack. I did, I admitted. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was necessary. Sometimes, the people who share your DNA are the ones most determined to drown you, Mr. Sterling said quietly, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. You have to be willing to cut the rope to save yourself. You did good, kid. You protected your castle. I looked around my apartment. The exposed brick, the modern art, the comfortable leather sofas. It wasn't just a piece of real estate anymore. It was a monument to my survival. I had protected it. I had protected myself. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly safe. I still got updates about the fallout, mostly through back channels. Sarah, Julian's ex-fiancée, reached out to me a few times. We had formed a strange, unspoken bond as the two people who had survived Julian's destruction. We met for coffee on a bright Tuesday morning. She looked completely different from the broken woman I had seen outside the courthouse 6 months ago. She was wearing a sharp business suit. Her hair was styled, and the dark circles under her eyes were gone. "You look great, Sarah," I said, handing her a latte. "I got a promotion," she smiled brightly, "and I finally got the bankruptcy discharged. It was a nightmare, but my credit is slowly healing. I'm starting over. I'm really happy for you." She took a sip of her coffee, her expression turning serious. "Have you heard the news about Julian?" I shook my head. "I cut contact completely. What happened?" "The state attorney general didn't drop the civil fraud case," Sarah said, leaning in. "Because your parents couldn't come up with the rest of the money to pay back the investors. The state froze all of Julian's remaining assets. Not that he had much, but they seized his bank accounts." "And the landlord?" I asked. "Mr. Vance finally got the eviction order executed by the sheriff," she said, a hint of dark satisfaction in her voice. "They physically removed him from the apartment. He tried to fight it, claimed he had tenant rights, but the judge threw it out. I heard from a mutual friend that he was couch surfing for a few weeks, but people caught on to his lies pretty quickly. Nobody wants to fund his visionary lifestyle anymore." "Where is he now?" "Nobody knows," Sarah shrugged. "He vanished, changed his phone number, deleted his social media. He's hiding from the state investigators and a mountain of debt collectors. He finally hit the wall, Mason. The golden boy crashed and burned." I looked out the window of the coffee shop, watching the busy street traffic. I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't feel a sense of vicious triumph. I just felt an overwhelming sense of inevitability. Julian had spent his entire life jumping off cliffs, fully expecting someone else to catch him. Eventually, he was bound to jump when there was no one left standing at the bottom. The final chapter of the saga closed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was at my desk when my private line rang. Very few people had that number. It showed up as an unknown caller. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. "Hello, Mason." It was a voice I hadn't heard in over half a year. It was thin, raspy, and completely broken. It was my mother. I didn't hang up immediately. I just listened to the heavy, shaky breathing on the other end of the line. "Mason, please don't hang up," Susan wept. "Please. I have nowhere else to turn." "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice polite but entirely distant, like I was speaking to a stranger. "We lost the house," she choked out, breaking into violent sobs. "The bank foreclosed last week. The sheriff came yesterday. We had to pack whatever we could fit into your father's car. They changed the locks, Mason. A man came and put a padlock on the front door." I closed my eyes. The image of the house I grew up in, the house with the big oak tree in the front yard, padlocked and seized by a bank, flashed in my mind. "Where are you living?" I asked. "We rented a tiny, one-bedroom apartment in the industrial district," she cried. "It's awful, Mason. It smells like mildew. The neighborhood is so dangerous. Your father is so depressed he won't even get out of bed. His heart can't take this." She paused, taking a ragged breath. The hook was coming. I could feel it. "Mason, you have so much money," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I know we made mistakes. I know we shouldn't have trusted Julian. But we are your parents. We took care of you. We fed you. Please just wire us $10,000. Just enough to help us get a better apartment. Just enough to help us survive." I sat in my luxurious, quiet office. I looked at the framed architectural awards on my wall. I thought about the 16-year-old boy flipping burgers, reeking of grease, desperately trying to earn a fraction of the love that was freely poured out onto his brother. I thought about the 22-year-old kid standing in the rain, being asked to take a criminal charge to save the golden child. "Mom," I said softly, "you used to tell me that I was so strong. You used to tell me that I could handle anything, while Julian was too sensitive for the real world." I know, I was wrong," she wept. "No," I corrected her gently. "You were right. I am strong. But I had to build that strength because no one was ever going to protect me. I had to become strong to survive this family." "Mason, please." "You made your choice, Mom," I said, my voice resolute, unwavering. "You bet your entire future, your home, and your security on Julian. You tried to sacrifice me to cover his debts. I cannot fund your destruction. I cannot rescue you from the consequences you chose." "You're a monster," she suddenly screamed, the desperation instantly turning to venom. "You are letting your own parents rot in the gutter while you live in a palace. God will punish you for this." "Goodbye, Mom," I said. I pressed the end call button. I didn't block the number this time. I didn't need to. I knew she would never call back. The final bridge had been burned to ashes, and the wind had scattered them away. That night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse. The city stretched out before me, a sea of glittering lights against the dark velvet sky. The air was cool, carrying the faint hum of traffic from the streets far below. I gripped the metal railing, feeling the solid, cold reality of it beneath my hands. For 30 years, I believed that my family held the ultimate power over my life. I believed that their approval was the currency I needed to buy my self-worth. I thought the threat of losing my inheritance, or losing my place at the Sunday dinner table, was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But looking out over the city, I realized something profound. The power in our family had never been about money, or inheritance, or even love. The power belonged to whoever controlled the story. My parents had controlled the story for decades. They wrote the script where Julian was the hero who needed saving, and I was the extra, the background character whose only purpose was to take the hits. When I refused to give up my apartment, when I dropped that folder on the dining room table, I didn't just expose Julian's fraud. I ripped the pen out of my parents' hands. I rewrote the ending. I chose not to be the victim. I chose not to be the savior. I chose to be the author of my own life. It cost me my parents. It cost me the illusion of a family. But the price of pretending was far higher. The price of pretending was my soul. Today, my firm is one of the most respected in the state. Carter and I are expanding to the West Coast. I have a core group of friends, people like Mr. Sterling, Chloe, and Carter, who respect me for who I am, not for what they can extract from me. That is my real family, the family I chose, the family I built. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly toxic, and walking away is often the hardest, yet most necessary, decision a person can make. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand with someone you loved to protect your own sanity? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one of them. And finally, if you're still hearing my voice right now, you belong to the 1% Club. Please drop the letter W in the comments below. W stands for winner. It's our secret code to recognize the amazing people who have the attention span and the empathy to watch a story all the way to the very end. You guys are the absolute best part of this channel. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button, and don't forget to follow so we can share more journeys together. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and write your own story.